Howdy, howdy, Sea Devil here, and welcome to another installment in our series on improving Total War Warhammer. Something that I've started since Mortal Empires came out. I just wanted to go over different things in the game that I think can be improved from a DAOE perspective, and since I've been really digging into multiplayer and online play lately, I thought I'd go through some of the Dwarf units that could be improved significantly or changed slightly to be much more interesting or better in some way. Now, I think the Dwarfs are in generally a pretty good place all around, particularly since I've been analyzing and doing spreadsheet work, looking at data, running units into units ever since the game released, I think in May of 2016 or whenever it was. And so I've been looking at these units for a long time, and CA has done a really good job at kind of slowly changing the units around and improving them. But I still think there's some mostly pretty small ways that the DAOE could be improved. Now, I'll go through each section, Lords, Heroes, Infantry, etc. And I'm going to talk about really these units because I think everything else is in pretty darn good shape. As you know, it's all the units are very reasonable. And we talk about the Lords. I don't see any real issues with the Lords. There's a really good mix. There's good abilities. Depending on what you want to do with the Lord that you bring. The only Lord that I would like to see changed, and it's really only one ability, is with Thorgrim Grudgebearer. Now, and that's this ability here, the High King ability. It's an ability that they've changed a couple of times now, or maybe just once, that it just has never quite functioned effectively. And because it has these cannot target if leadership is lower than 50% and disabled if hit points are greater than 50%, it's a good idea, but it's really hard to make function, even in campaign. So it's rarely useful in multiplayer, and I think you could actually do something here to pay homage to the ability, the idea that Thorgrim is the High King, and that would be simply to do what they've done with Grombrindle the White Dwarf. They made his ability, Grombrindle has no fear. It's something that's just bound to him. He can use it once map wide. What I would like to see with Thorgrim is for this ability to be removed and simply have it be made so that it is a constant buff map wide for his army, that everyone is immune to psychology. Raise his price by 50, make him 1700 base, and I think you're done. And I think that makes sense. You know, you don't have to add the weapon damage buff, the charge bonus buff, the melee attack buff, or the leadership is lower than or hit points greater than. Just make it the High King, make it bound to him, and if he leads an army, all of his troops will be immune to psychology. I think that makes for an interesting Lord choice if you want to mix him up with troops that aren't immune to psychology, and it will make for an interesting sort of a very interesting differential between the other Lords as to what type of armies Thorgrim can field. And I think would actually be a fantastic little change. At his base cost, make it 1700 instead of 1650, and take out the buffs, weapon damage, charge bonus, melee attack, and just make his army immune to psychology. I don't know if 50 is the right number. Maybe it's 100. Maybe you make him 1750 starting or something like that. But that's a basic idea. Instead of making this an ability that you may or may not take, he is the High King. Make this a bound ability, just like Grombrindle's. Grombrindle has no fear. So that's the first unit I'd like to see changed. Now the heroes are also in much better shape. I think the Runesmith is actually just about perfect right now. They're really good. They just changed his Rune of Wrath and Rune to have 150 meter range. I know it only goes off 4 times, but the Runesmith is actually in a really great spot right now, and so is the Thane. The only thing I would like to see, and the reason I have the Thane here, is I'd like to see an extra hero added, basically a Thane with a two-hander instead of a shield, so we can have the DAOE can have an armor piercing option. give him a bigger charge bonus, more melee attack, less melee defense, and I think that rounds out the heroes a lot more, giving the Dowie a Thane that is a little more tanky versus a Thane that is armor piercing and a little more vulnerable. I think that would actually be a big improvement to the Dowie. Most other factions have armor piercing options for their heroes. Ironically, Empire is not one of them, which is really quite strange actually. They should have two heroes with armor piercing. They're Warrior Priest and Empire Captain, I think, or at least when they put them on horses. But really, I like where the Thane is right now, and if you wanted to, you could give him different abilities too. Instead of you could actually give the Thane with a two-hander this Master Rune of Stromny Redbeard, and you could give the Thane with the one-hander and the shield an actual different one that is melee defense or something else that's more defensive, and just swap them out so they're more clearly demarcated as far as your choices. The next hero is a Master Engineer, and I mean, I'm an engineer myself, and I've always wanted the Master Engineer to really be a strength in the Dowie army. His buffs are good, like Entrenchment is a cool buff, Ballistics Calibration is a good buff, you know, Extra Powder, you know, it's debatable how good it is, but it's interesting and it's cheap, only 83. His items are interesting, like Rune of Slowness. How fantastic is that? Minus 12% speed for anything that's within 40 meters of him, minus 8% charge bonus. Firing Authority, I'm not so sure a Master Engineer would have a magical ring on him. I would like to see something different than that, but really what it is about the Master Engineer that I would like to see changed is basically how he functions in his missile damage. Now, the Master Engineer is really inaccurate. I mean, I have an old video where I had two Master Engineers face off against each other, and they both ran out of bullets, and neither killed the other, and they went into melee combat. It's an absolutely stunning video. I mean, I put it to music, and because this was 2 years ago. At the time, I was, you know, I don't know. And it's still the case. The Master Engineer is so inaccurate that he's really hard to use. Where he does excel is shooting into blobs. It's almost like he's a mobile piece of artillery, which is an interesting idea, because if you get your Master Engineer set up in the right place, he can shoot into infantry blobs and be kind of like a mobile piece of artillery. But the Dowie already have that in, well, artillery, flying war machines. They have Thunders, they have, you know, like Trollhammer torpedoes. They don't need that. What I would like to see with the Master Engineer is, number one, I would like to see his accuracy put way up and him made a single target versus a, you know, something that can hit a mass blob and kill 10 infantry at a time or 6 infantry at a time or whatever it is. I'd like to see him made single target and have his damage buffed. And I would like to see, well, maybe you don't need, if his accuracy is really good, maybe his damage is fine, but I'd like to see his damage be made magical damage by just saying that his slugs are rune-inscribed slugs. And I think that would make the Master Engineer a really interesting choice. He's already got the right abilities, but if you make his missile damage magical missile damage, because he's using rune-inscribed slugs, and you make him accurate enough so that he can hit something, because right now he can't hit anything. I mean, he can't hit a dinosaur 50 meters away. It is so frustrating to test the Master Engineer, you know, for me, because I'm an engineer and I want the Master Engineer to work. I think these two things, giving him magical damage on his missiles and making him much more accurate, and I guess three things, and making him a single entity, almost like a melee specialist, a one-on-one specialist, as opposed to being able to fire into blobs, would all of a sudden make the Master Engineer a definite choice. It would give the Dowie a option for doing magical damage beside from using Thorgrim or Grumbrindle, or I suppose even the Rune Lord or Runesmith, but that's not a single target. It's more of a group when they use their runes, and it would really make him an interesting choice to bring to the battlefield, and you might see more Master Engineers used. It would allow for a much wider variety of builds for the Dowie forces. Now, the miners. So in tabletop, the miners can actually pop up from underground pretty much anywhere on the map. Now, there's a number of ways you could do this, but I would like to see the miners kind of like that, and because they're very, very weak, they have very low weapon strength, they are armor piercing, which is technically good, but against any unit where armor piercing is going to matter, it's actually not all that great because their melee attack is so low. So a lot of the other very low level troops don't have any armor. They all have like 30 armor or 20 armor or something like that. And any units that do have a lot of armor, like, you know, great swords or, you know, chosen or things like that would matter, they can't even hit them. And they get absolutely demolished. So they are really a filler unit that you're going to just throw in the way if you have an extra 325 gold. They don't have a spot in the lineup, and I mean a regular spot to be interesting. The miners with blasting charges actually do, because the blasting charges are quite powerful, and they're fairly interesting unit. What I would like to see is that when you deploy your miners, they start underground, and you can still Vanguard deploy them, and they can't be seen by the enemy. It'd almost be like the Skaven spell when they come out from underneath the ground and emerge and fight. But basically, you could move them around while they were underground at a, you know, maybe a speed of 10 or something like that, and then you could just give them a command, a little button on the side that would tell them to pop up from underground, and then they could go to war. And what that would do is give them a real interesting place. You might have to make them a little more pricey, you know, maybe kind of, you know, 375 or something like that, or 350, but not much, because they're really not a powerful unit. But it would make them have a really distinct role, and a role that's aligns with the tabletop. And you know, it would be nice to see miners. I mean, miners in a lot of armies, because that is what dwarfs are. In our dwarf hearts, we're miners, and I think that would give them a good place, and I would like to see that, because right now they're just a filler fodder unit. They don't have a real strong place in the game right now. I want to talk a bit briefly about the Longbeards with great weapons. Now, overall, Dowie infantry is in a good spot. Everyone seems to have a pretty good role. The only reason I bring up the Longbeards with great weapons is the dwarfs have gone through two nerfs in quick succession, and it's put the Longbeards with regular, like just your axe and shield. They're in a kind of a solid spot. They're really quite good. But the nerfs really hurt the Longbeards with great weapons. You know, they had 6,600 hit points for a unit, now they're 6,450. They lost a little charge bonus, and they are underperforming a little bit. I would like to see, you know, maybe a little more weapon strength, maybe a little more charge bonus, you know, maybe a little more melee attack. Not much, like 30 to 32. Weapon strength 34 to 36, and maybe a charge bonus of you know, something like, well, maybe not, 16 is probably good, but just a small buff, because they are underperforming right now, and a couple stat points here and there, like a 2 point on the melee attack, and maybe, you know, 4 points on the weapon strength, so maybe bring them up to 38, would actually put them in a nice spot and make them relatively useful. And I could see people saying, well, Longbeards with great weapons have been very good for a long time, and they are actually a pretty good unit. I did a lot of testing on them early in the game, and they were one of the units that really outperformed. But as I've said, they have gone through 2 quick nerfs, and they are underperforming now in my testing. The last unit I want to talk about, well, I mean, the missile infantry, there's nothing to say. The dwarf missile infantry is in a great spot right now. There's so much choice. You know, the Dawi are just blessed with choice in missile infantry. There's everything you could ask for. They're all quite nicely priced. The Bugman's Rangers, which I've been using a lot lately because I really love them for edge defense, are really good. The Trollhammer torpedoes have finally come down enough in price, and same with the Iron Drakes, so they're really, because the Iron Drakes started out at 900 and the Trollhammer torpedoes were at 1100 when the game came out, and just couldn't make use of them. But now they're cheap enough you can take a chance on them, and the missile infantry all around is just in great shape. Actually the artillery also, I'll say before I go on to the gyrocopters, are also in great shape. The organ gun was buffed too much, and now it's been nerfed to about the right spot. It's a really good piece of artillery right now, and the flame cannon as well is actually really strong and can pull value at 1250. The Goblobber's really strong. They buffed up the grudge thrower a little bit. I mean, the cannon used to be the piece of artillery for the Dawi, and it outperformed everything else by a mile. It's now a choice, and the bolt thrower is even not too bad. It can be used in places. I think maybe the grudge thrower, I mean, I would like to see the grudge thrower brought down in cost maybe to 650 or something like that, but I will not complain about the artillery. The Dwarf artillery is a very, very nice lineup, and they're all good. There's nothing that is really underperforming in this group. The only thing I might say is the grudge thrower is, well, actually it's probably good at 700. It's a good piece of artillery too. The only thing I want to say about the gyrocopters is, now the gyrocopters, they did make a change to this, and this was a stealth change and a stealth buff, I'm going to say, and that is they've improved the gyrocopters very significantly when they removed their stagger animation. The gyrocopters used to have a stagger animation. When they got hit with arrows, they would kind of fly up in the air and fly down. It would stop them from shooting. And removing that animation from the gyrocopter repertoire has made them much, much better. That said, they are still, I mean, they all have very low DPS. They're very low damage per second. Their bombs are quite powerful. They're good, but in general, the amount of damage they can do is low per minute. But if they're allowed to operate over a long period of time and use up all their ammo, they're quite good. Where they really are quite weak is when they're facing anything in the air up against them, even like a fellbats or harpies or carrion. They're just going to get murdered. And what I would like to see with that is, okay, melee defense is 6. I thought, well, maybe a good melee defense might be stronger. It might even be better just to go with a much higher melee attack, a better charge bonus. It's at 25, and perhaps a armor piercing, because I do have blades going around and around, so armor piercing weapon strength. Just, I'd like to see them like they're not in an awful place, but what I would like to see is that element of the gyrocopter be brought more in line with what they can do, and then you could use them if they had a charge bonus. I mean, they are coming out of the air. They could certainly have the charge bonus of what a cav has at 70 or something like that. There's no reason they couldn't, because they don't have a lot of weapon strength, but they should have armor piercing, I think. And then this is a dual option for the Dawi to bring your gyrocopter. You can use your weapons, and you can use them for rear charges. You can, you're still going to lose to any lords that are in the air, like Bretonnian lords or lords on a dragon or something. But you can be a little bit more threatening, and you have multiple uses for the gyrocopters in that case. Maybe you don't need to increase their melee attack, but increase their charge bonus very significantly, and give them armor piercing. Well, yeah, give them armor piercing melee attack. None of them have it, and it would actually make sense. I mean, you got blades going around fast enough to carry a dwarf in an iron box, so those blades are moving. So that's what I would like to see. Other than that, the Dawi are in really good shape, and you know, I've seen some recent nerfs to the Warriors of Dragonfire Pass, you know, Longbeards, and I loved the buffs to the mass and the Ironbreakers especially. They finally feel like the unit they should be. They've got a little bit of extra AP damage. I mean, in general, the Dowie infantry is really great shape. I would just like to see the miners, you know, be made more of a thing for the Dowie army. And I'm just, you know, the Longbeards are underperforming a little bit according to the data that I'm getting. They're still, they're okay. I mean, they're not awful, but they're just, you know, as a dwarf, I would like to see as close to perfection as I could get, and these are the units I'd like to see. Thorgrim, it's just one ability. High King. Thane, I'd like to see a two-handed version. The Master Engineer, I'd like to see him do magical missile damage with rune-inscribed slugs and be more of a single target entity with much higher accuracy. I'd like to see the miners be able to move underground undetected, pop up out from under the ground wherever they get to, so they could be a much more interesting and useful unit. Longbeards, maybe a bit extra melee attack, a bit extra weapon strength might bring them in line where they should be. And I'd like to see the Gyrocopters with maybe a much higher charge bonus and armor piercing weapon damage for their melee attacks. And you know, that's about it. So that's it for the video. I will obviously, I pay very close attention to updates and buffs, and I do tons of testing, so I have pretty good, generally stay pretty on top of what the changes mean to the Dowie. But I would like to hear from anyone else who has any thoughts on where the Dowie are underperforming, or what units you would like to see just tinkered with. I know CA is definitely looking at this stuff, and they're paying attention, and they're doing, in my opinion, they're doing a great job when balanced, because it's so hard in this game. But these small changes would actually, I think, really flush out the Dowie army, because you'd have a different reason to bring Thorgrim Gudgeberry. You could have completely different army setups. Your Thane choices would actually be pretty big for the Dowie, because the Dowie don't have a lot of armor piercing options when it comes to Lords. The Master Engineer having magical damage bring another element to the Dowie army. You know, miners moving around underground would be beautiful. It'd be a way for the Dowie to actually flank without bringing Gyrocopters, and the Longbeards, I think, is just a need a straight up buff to be where I think they should be. But that's about it. So hope you found it interesting, and I'd love to hear any comments. I mean, I love comments on all videos. I mean, anyone who watches my videos knows that. And I would love to hear what your thoughts are on the Dwarf units and where they are, and improvements you'd like to see as well. But that's it for now, so hope you found it interesting, and I will see you soon.